Hello, friends. So this week the reading seemed to really kind of focus on how to develop a lesson plan in an intentional way, develop a learning outcome, but also how to evaluate. Um, the Some of the things that, and I mentioned this in my reflection, some of the things, like the questions that you ask yourself before a lesson, those things were things I was doing kind of subconsciously. And it's nice to have the list there. So I would ask myself these questions when I was developing a module for identifying fake news for the Comp 2 students. And kind of at the direction of my supervisor and mentor, was asked these questions and asked myself these questions. I It's nice to have that list there, right? So I can intentionally ask those questions as opposed to just kind of intuiting that I should be asking those questions, if that makes sense. As far as evaluating goes, like evaluating how well you did something or how well the lesson went or how much actual, learning or acquisition happens. I like the idea of not only asking students, how they felt like it went, but also asking yourself, kind of a self-reflection. I think I've mentioned this before, like sometimes you have to be a little careful just with self-reporting, right? If the student doesn't want to hurt your feelings, or I've gotten some feedback before where the student didn't like me, right? And so they said, I'd like a different, the thing I would change about these lessons was I would like a different instructor. And so that, doesn't necessarily reflect my instruction or the lesson. But I think it's important to ask yourself questions all the time. You want to really think about how you're planning the lesson, why you're planning the lesson, what you're hoping to gain. I think, and then after the lesson, like how well did it go? And I think that's kind of the point of this whole class, is to kind of, get in that mindset of self-reflection, to get in that mindset of intentionality, right? To really be, self-reflective, but also to be open to feedback, not only from students, but from colleagues. I don't know that it's going to change how I do things necessarily. I think it informs it and kind of gives you the vocabulary, right? Instead of it just being, well, I feel like this is going to go well, or I feel like this is the way to do it. It's a more, I guess, data-driven decision, where you, have these outlines or these guidelines, consciously as opposed to subconsciously. And I think it can make you a more effective and mindful instructor. So the chapter was helpful in that it gave me kind of that vocabulary, those words, or those actual concrete questions to ask myself. But I don't know that it's going to change any of my routines necessarily. I think it just will help me be more intentional with my lesson planning, and also with revising lesson planning. Yeah, I think it was a useful chapter, but I guess it wasn't new information. It was just, I've taken a couple of classes, reflective teaching practices, and also teaching for social justice. So these questions, have been around, or that idea of reflective teaching, right? I've been exposed to in other classes and in other areas, and I was fortunate enough that most of my teaching mentors that I've worked with have a very focused mindset, and have a very intentional plans and lesson plans and learning outcomes. And so I guess I was raised to already be thinking about these things, even if I didn't have the vocabulary for it. But it is nice to have, those laid out ideas and questions and thoughts to really work with in a tangible way. So yeah, interested to hear other people's thoughts. And I will see you all for real next Friday.